Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursdays and Sunday evenings just for our own entertainment. For all you Audie fans, he is asleep in the bedroom. What can I tell you? Lazy cat. He may be out, however. He has been photobombing a lot lately, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Tonight we are picking up where we left off on Thursday evening, and that was with the incredible baby bump drop in Birkin Head in 2019 when Nutmeg was allegedly pregnant with Archie. So we're going to take a quick look at the intro. We're going to come right back and we're going to get right into it. So, January 2019, on the 14th, we have this incident in which Nutmeg is out in public. The baby bump drops to her knees. It is widely documented. It showed up on Getty's website the day after. So there's no question that these photos were touched up or that this is all some sort of weird conspiracy theory. No, it was there for the entire world to see. But no one picked up on it. No one said a word about what is glaringly obvious. 2 days later, and this is according to Nutmeg's timetable that she put out during the Oprah interview, she was curled up on the floor, sobbing. She no longer wanted to be alive, and she confides her distress to the sock puppet, and they are forced to tough it out and go to the event for Santa Bali, the Cirque du Soleil performance that evening. Well, the only one who looked at all distressed was the sock puppet. And he did, I have to say, he did look distracted and unhappy. So do I believe she had that conversation with him? Absolutely. I do believe she did. Do I think that there was any reality behind the conversation? No. Now, here's the thing. And I've said this before, I will say it again. The fact that these two events took place 48 hours apart, I think, is very telling. But there is actually a little bit more when you dig deeper, and this does not have anything to do with the pregnancy. But when you dig a little deeper, you start to look at other things that were also boiling to the surface at this time. Now, in November of 2018, just 2 months earlier, the staff complaints started to become so egregious that they were documented at this point, and people were talking about it. It was not just a question of one or two staff members quitting or crying into their beer on the weekends. It was becoming an issue. Nutmeg was being widely known as Duchess Difficult, and the staff had already experienced a turnover rate. Jason Knopf was already notifying the palace of this, even though it wasn't out in the open for those of us out in the real world. It was absolutely known in the royal circles. No one was hiding this anymore. But of course, the royal family was not sharing it with the press. But the bubble was already beginning to burst. Nutmeg's behavior had been very much out of control. Now, again, not related to the pregnancy. And like I said, this video is about the pregnancy, but I do want to throw out a couple more factors that may be behind-the-scenes influences. The previous summer, 2018, sometime, I suppose, in around July, Nutmeg did two very interesting things. One, she signed up with Sunshine Sachs, a Hollywood PR agency, and their focus is not in the UK. When you are doing public relations, you are very much country-bound in your career, because PR in the US is not the same as PR in the UK. We're talking about two very different cultures. Yes, we share the same language. We have much of our history in common, but we are no longer the same cultures, and we cannot be approached and marketed to in the same way, which is why if you want public relations in the UK, you go to a UK firm, because they are the ones with the connections. They are the people who know the people you need to know, and they also know the ins and outs of the system. Same thing with the US. That certainly indicated they were absolutely going back to the United States. Well, Nutmeg was going back. The sock puppet was relocating with her. So that was already on the back burner. The other thing they did was they commissioned Finding Freedom from Owen Steube and Carolyn Durant. That book was begun in the summer of 2018. So what we have here is Megxit beginning. Now, for any of you who doubt that Megxit actually began much ahead of that, the winter of 2019 to 2020, all you have to do is listen to the Netflix documentary in which the sock puppet very clearly says, and I've cited this quote before, he very clearly says this was at least 2 years in the making. Yeah. So they were already looking to move out, and their commitment to the UK, to the British people, was non-existent at this point. They were simply filling time until they could make good their escape or make good their cash grab, depending on how you want to look at it. Certainly, at least a big part of that was getting the title for the child. All right, so that is our backdrop, and we now have Nutmeg claiming mental health issues to the sock puppet. The only explanation that seems at all reasonable to me is that the sock puppet did take the issue higher up. He took it to his father, his grandmother, senior Buckingham Palace aides, who knows, somewhere in the royal family system. The sock puppet said, "You're driving her to the brink. You need to protect her." And I think at that point somebody did step in and offer some kind of protection. Do not show the baby bump drop photos. Do not speculate on this. I think word came down from on high that there ought to be no speculation on the pregnancy. That is the only thing that makes a lick of sense to me. Why else would anyone pass up what is clearly a fabulous story? All right, so once we get past that and we start moving forward, we then have to go to the actual delivery of the baby. And we have 3 sources for this. That is Lady Colin Campbell's book. It was Harry and Meghan. It's the second book. It's mentioned in the notes. We have Tom Bower's book, Revenge, mentioned in the notes. And we have the sock puppet's memoir, Spare. I haven't put it in the notes yet. I probably will, just to be fair. But gosh, it's not a memoir. It's a work of fiction. And I hate to give it the credibility of putting it in with 2 really good pieces of research. So, yeah, but I'm probably going to do it anyway. So we have the story of Nutmeg, a woman who was allegedly at the time 37 years old, a geriatric mother, deciding that she was going to have her baby at home with the assistance of her own mother, who was, first of all, a person with no medical training. Apparently she has social work training. She has no medical training, and was the mother of only one child. So even in the realm of maternity, she was limited. And which is not to say that if you haven't had a baby, it's the only way you can do this. But a woman who's only had one child and has had no medical training is going to be supervising your at-home delivery. That doesn't make a lick of sense for anyone, least of all a geriatric mother. But apparently, saner heads prevailed, and Nutmeg did decide at the last minute that she was going to have the baby at the Portland hospital. They were not going to reveal the names of the medical team. Now, this is very important because in the royal family, you always reveal the names of your doctors. It is the public's security that responsible medical personnel are there. And at this point, we're not even talking safety of mother and child. We're talking of credibility to attest to the fact that this child is, in fact, legitimate, that it's not a warming pan baby, that the person purported to be the mother is, in fact, the mother, and that is how the child is coming into the world. This is a big deal for them. It's not a big deal for us here in the U.S. because you have the same rights if you were a naturally born child, an adopted child, a child born of surrogacy. Your rights are identical, period. We don't slice and dice on this one. They do in the UK. Now, it's their circus. They can do what they want. But I, as an American, of course, I find it a little odd, but like I say, they get to do what they want. It's their country, and this is how they do it. And a child born of surrogacy is not considered legitimate by British law. Neither is an adopted child. It's all there is to it. We can find this as medieval as we want, but it's their rules, their laws. So that's why having staff that can be identified and can attest to the legitimacy of the birth is so important. And even to this day, when you consider the fact that if anything happened to William, Catherine, their children, little Archie could end up sitting on the British throne. Also, do keep in mind that it doesn't even have to be William, Catherine, and their children, which is good because I'm uncomfortable talking about anything happening to those people. Any branch of this family could grow into old age without marrying, without having children. For all we know, the little Wales children could be into sexual orientations that we can't even imagine in the 21st century. They may not have children. I guess that's the bottom line. And what happens if some of them do, some of them don't, and 100 years from now, the line gets so thinned out that they have to go back to Charles and his line and then count forward again, and they have had to do that before. There is no question about this. This is how the Hanovers got on the throne, okay? So there we go on that one. It is significant to them. Information was not being released. Nutmeg and the sock puppet sneak off to the hospital, apparently at 5 in the morning, where Nutmeg gives birth. The Buckingham Palace makes the announcement that she is in labor rather late in the day, and almost immediately afterward. The fact that they have had the child and the child is a boy is published on their own Sussex royal website. So it's very clear that they wanted control of the announcement, but The other side of this is this also leads to the very real possibility that no one involved actually knew what was going on until it happened. Again, if it was a surrogacy birth, that might well be the case. It would not be Nutmeg in labor. It would be some other woman who, for all we know, could have been in labor in Germany or Romania. We don't know. All of it is shrouded in secrecy. So let's go back to the UK to May 6th, when the putative child Archie was born. He was announced as Master Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor. That was the statement Nutmeg and the sock puppet gave. This was not the palace. They were clearly aware of the fact that he could have been the Earl of Dumbarton. That was one of the sock puppet's subsidiary titles that his child was entitled to. No, they declined that title. The statement at the time was that they were choosing to raise him as an ordinary citizen and that he would choose for himself when he was 18. Of course, that story changed very quickly. So now we come back and let's look at the birth certificate. So this is a copy of the actual birth certificate as it was originally filed. Now, Buckingham Palace came in later and made a change because they did not like the name on the birth certificate. Well, Nutmeg's name. It says Rachel Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, and they came back with the Duchess of Sussex. Or, yeah, I believe it was just Duchess of Sussex was the change they requested. I never found that at all suspicious. I figured Nutmeg and the sock puppet threw whatever name they wanted into the mix, and the palace came out and cleaned up the details because they have a specific way of listing these things. I do want to very quickly mention, though, that later in the Netflix special, they made quite a point of showing what they claimed to be the fetal scan, the sonogram of Archie before he was born. And the problem with this scan, which was allegedly being put out to prove that she was, in fact, the child's legitimate mother, that she carried him, is there's no name on the scan. Sorry about that, no name. Which means it's not proof of anything at all. And I would have to say, why even bother putting out a scan if it has no name on it and is of no value? So the fact of the matter is, they have never ponied up any proof of this, including the so-called scan they later released on Netflix, because her name should have been on it. And there would have been absolutely no harm to any of these people to show her name as the mother on that scan. None. They were in fact saying, look, this is Meghan's scan of when she was pregnant. But her name isn't there. So there was no privacy issue to protect. They were already claiming it was her scan. So why remove the name? There's only one possible explanation. It's because the name on the scan was not Nutmeg's. I have to say, at this point, yeah, just doesn't look real good for them. The next part we're going to have to take a look at quickly is the presentation of Archie to the world. This had been organized in advance by Nutmeg with Gayle King. And in fact, Gayle King was to be given the exclusive, but I believe Sky News got in on the action too. For all I know, Nutmeg merged this to half a dozen news agencies, telling each of them they had the exclusive. But in the U.S., at least as far as U.S. media was concerned, the exclusive went to Gayle King. Absolutely unprecedented. The British were cut out of the loop. I have to say, I understand why people would be very ticked off about that. Absolutely. And I also understand that, again, it is just one more highly suspicious activity that they have engaged in. And we haven't even gotten to the sock puppet story yet. In Spare, the sock puppet talks about going up a freight elevator that apparently doesn't exist in this hospital. I've never been there, I can't say, but I do know people have said, nope, they don't have one. Went into a room, sucked down all of the nitrous oxide from an unattended nitrous oxide container. And we've all heard about that one because medical personnel from the UK have commented widely on this, saying, if I left an unattended container of nitrous oxide in a patient's room, I would be fired. And yes, of course you would. This is a controlled substance. It would be like leaving a handful of heroin on somebody's lunch card. Maybe not as bad. I've used nitrous oxide. I've used it at the dentist. It was, I don't know if it still is, but it was at one time a very common dental anesthesia. Heroin, to the best of my knowledge, never was. But you just don't leave unattended drugs. They have to be accounted for. They have to be inventoried. You can't just let people come in and get high off your hospital drugs. It was an utterly crazy story, but it's his story and he's sticking with it. And there was like zero sense if, in fact, they had Nutmeg bouncing around on a beach ball to encourage labor. What in the world was she doing in the hospital in the first place? You generally don't go into the hospital until labor has already started. So the sock puppet story was the kind of story you would expect a man who has never witnessed a childbirth to come up with. And I would have to say, between all of these events, and I would highly encourage you to read Tom Bower's book, read Lady C's book, ignore the sock puppets book. Again, fiction as opposed to research. And you start to see a picture coming out of this of two people who were determined to exit the UK at their first available opportunity, but only after they had scooped in everything they could get. Money, jewels, titles. They walked away with a lot. And for Nutmeg, one of the most important considerations was the fame. And heaven knows she got plenty of that. So when we look at the putative child Archie, do I believe that this is a legitimate child by British law? I do not. I do not. I have to say, with everything surrounding this pregnancy, everything surrounding the childbirth, all of the lies, all of the deceit, all of the obfuscations, no, I do not. At this point, for me to believe it, they would have to pony up some little scrap of proof. And frankly, that little scrap of proof would have to be enough to outweigh the great Birkin Head baby bump dump. So, yeah, I honestly walked into this whole thing some years ago thinking, no, of course she would have had to have had the baby. But having seen all of the evidence, having looked at the information brought forth by good researchers, and having seen the subsequent events not showing the child in little bits and snatches, of the child not changing the way a child should, or in some cases, changing a little too much, I've got to wonder. And my doubts are not going to be satisfied very easily. And this is a problem that has to be laid at the door of Nutmeg and the sock puppet. They are the ones who created all of this doubt, all of this confusion, all of this chaos, claiming on one hand they want to be private individuals. On the other hand, boy, they took titles for those kids in a big hurry, didn't they? Yeah. So every time privacy issues benefit them, that's where they land. Every time privacy issues do not benefit them, they flip sides and go over. So no, this is just, they are just playing the game for all it's worth. Do I think that Archie is a legitimate member of the British royal family? Not by British law. So I guess that's where we're going to leave it. Now, I will take a look at the other putative child at a later date, but of course, we also have to throw the alleged miscarriage in there. Because again, we've got so many lies, so many inconsistencies, that it's very hard to believe any of this. For my part, and I will just say this is a personal observation, for my part, I really hope there are no children, because if there are actually children under the care of those two, those children are being left alone by their parents, with whomever happens to be handy to care for them. Apparently, the story is they're pretty much being raised by Doria, and Doria didn't even stick around to raise her own child. So you gotta freaking wonder. I fervently hope there are no children, because I would hate to think that there were children coming into the world in this mess. All right, that's what I have for you today. We are going to take a look at a slideshow on the way out. Let me just take a moment to thank you all for your good wishes and for your patience. I understand that, the videos have not been, they haven't been as long as they usually are, and I'm sorry about that. I expect my recovery will be moving along fairly quickly, and we'll get things back to normal soon enough. But thank you for your patience and your tolerance and all your good wishes. Slideshow on the way out. Hope to see you next time. In the meanwhile, have a terrific day.